Right? Good time. All right, so we are beginning a new unit today. Let's start talking about bones here in just a few minutes. And we had an exam last week, and when I left, I wrote a letter to some people and said it was an unmitigated disaster. So, golly. So I know for a fact we're going to be in the computer lab from here on out, except maybe finals. Finally, I've got to figure it out now. But everything else will be done out there. Already taken care of, already booked, we're good. As for the last exam, I've got some thinking to do, and I'll let you know something on Wednesday. So just sit tight about that last exam. Okay? I will do that on the lunch for good reason. Okay? It's just crazy. Crazy. So we'll figure it out. All right. So God has given each of you gift from His great variety of spiritual gifts. Use them well to serve one another. A lot of us have a gift that we're very apparent to us, that we know, we use it well. Some of you maybe have a gift that you're not quite sure about. And as time goes by, you will hopefully listen. I had no idea that I had a gift of hospitality, so I got over it. There you go. Hopefully you will be able to understand it and be able to use it. So now that Samuel's here, let's open the word. Father, we thank you so much for this day, and I thank you that truly it is fall. The weather has definitely changed. Thank you that seasons do continue to march on, that we get to experience a variety of things in our life, a variety of weather events, a variety of experiences. Father, we all get to experience different spiritual gifts from each other. And may we use them to support each other, to love each other, and help each other grow in our faith and our understanding. Father, I pray this week, even though it be short, that we would stick to our studies and be able to feel very good about what we are learning and understanding. All right, so I hope you all got to enjoy the street fair. You were there, it was good. I got stuck and I talked to a whole bunch of alumni and I didn't get away from it, so I didn't get to go out and buy my wife chili and grilled cheese sandwich and all that stuff I usually get. Oh well. All right, so bone tissue today, and that means one quiz, and lab is lab exam review. And yes, we are having lab on Wednesday. Okay? And if you are a Thursday person, I've already talked to you. If you can make it tomorrow morning, that would be great. Or come with us on Wednesday so that we can do that and get you ready for the lab exam. Okay? So there'll be some example questions and some other things happening in lab. All right, so that's this week. Excuse me. Oh, I don't know why I didn't take that slide out. All right. So by the end of today, here's what we will hopefully accomplish. We're going to be able to describe the structure of a flat bone and a long bone. We've been thinking about our lab exam, flat and long. You probably already have an idea. What is the difference? We're going to talk about similarities and differences. We're going to talk about 4 cells that are found in bone that have a role in the formation of bone and in the maintenance of your bones. So that's the second thing we'll do today. And then we'll finish today probably with just intramembranous ossification. I know it's a big, huge word, but we'll figure it out. And then probably next week, or on Wednesday rather, we'll talk about endochondral ossification. So we're going to compare and contrast those 2 processes. So that's where we're headed today. Okay, so that's our goal for today. So that's what we're talking about. We've seen that diagram before. So we're going to be talking about skeletal tissues. Not just bones for this unit, we'll also talk about the joints. And some of the tissues that we find in joints. Okay? We'll be looking at both. Remember that we have described the axial skeleton as the skull, the vertebrae, and the ribs. And then the appendicular skeleton as the pectoral girdle, the pelvic girdle, upper extremity, lower extremity. By now, I hope you have been able to name all the bones, and you are very well versed in understanding some of the markings on some of the structures. You're getting better and better about that every day. Okay? So, what we're hoping for. Okay, and we'll spend more time this week. Why are you pulling that face, Alexis? Just the face. Okay. All right. So, in terms of bone tissue, we're going to start by describing the functions. So what are the functions of bone? What is the first thing you think of when you think about bone?
Structural.
Structure. Is that what I heard? Yeah, what else? Movement. Okay. Do bones move on their own? No, but they are used for attachment of movement, right? Okay. What else do we do with bones or need for bones? Protection. Okay. What else? Blood cell formation. Eugene. Okay. Blood cell formation. Okay. The cells of blood are going to be formed in the bone. You may already have an understanding of that, but we're going to be talking a little bit more about that today. So in the bone is the bone marrow, and that's the site of blood cell formation. All right, the next one is electrolyte balance. This is one, unless you're cheating, you probably wouldn't hit. Bone is made of calcium. You're probably, again, aware of that. But it also contains a lot of phosphate. Calcium and phosphate are two things in blood that have to be balanced. And we have to have a specific amount in our blood. Calcium is going to be used for many things. We're going to talk about calcium with bone movement, or muscle movement, excuse me. We're going to talk about calcium for your nerves working. We're going to talk about calcium for hormones and lots of other things. I mean, it's that important. Okay? Phosphate, we've seen phosphate when we talked about DNA and RNA. It's one of the structural components of those, for instance. It has a lot of other roles, but that's an important thing it does. All right. What else? Acid-base buffering. Remember, the pH of your blood is 7.35 to 7.45. Very tightly regulated pH. We'll talk more about that next semester. And bones have a role in maintaining that particular pH. And then the last one is detoxification. Detoxification. Specifically, detoxification of heavy metals. Things like lead, cadmium, and mercury, and things of that nature that we might ingest in our foods. And so if you were to accumulate them in your body's tissues, they become damaging. So the body has a way of putting them into the bones where they kind of get lost or disappear, as it were. Cool thing is that if you are an archaeologist, you can take bones, figure out what kind of heavy metals are in them, and figure out where they lived and what they used to do for a life. Okay, so there's kind of a side note to that. All right, so we're spending most of our time on these three to start: support, protection, and movement. And we're going to talk about joints and muscles. Then we'll pick up the blood cells, as I mentioned, next semester, and we'll be talking some more about acid-base balance next semester as well. All right, so one of the things we hope to understand before we finish today is what's the difference between flat and long. So in this diagram, we can see a flat bone is exactly what you would think a flat bone is. It's not round, it's not cylindrical, it's flat. So the sternum is a flat bone. Skull, flat bone, except for facial structure. So the frontal, the parietals, the occipital, the temporal, those are flat bones. Then we have the long bones, mostly in the appendages. The humerus, the radius, the ulna, the femur, the tibia, the fibula, long bones. Now, somebody will try and say there are short bones, like this one. It's fine. It's not a category that gets a lot of attention. But there are the carpals and your tarsals that are short bones. And then there's the irregular bones, the ones that just basically don't fit anywhere else, like the vertebrae. Okay? So we're going to spend our time, as I mentioned, with long and flat. Okay? Because those two are the more common, and they are the ones that we are going to look at in terms of how they get formed from the embryonic period during development. All right, so there's our typical long bone. So we're using a humerus for our long bone. And you can see that there are going to be several things in this bone that are going to be of interest to us. First of all, the shaft of the bone is going to be called the diaphysis. And the ends of the bone are going to be called the epiphyses. Right? So we're going to get to those in a second. Long bones all have compact bone around the outside. So do flat bones. Compact bone is always found on the outside of the bone, both long and flat. In this picture, we're showing it obviously in the long bone. Now this is a bone where the bone marrow has been removed. And now you can clearly see the compact bone. So inside of the compact bone, in the shaft, is the medullary cavity. Okay? Your bones are hollow. Weight reduction, cushioning, and a space for blood cell formation. That's typically why there is a medullary cavity. Spongy bone, as the name implies, looks like a sponge. And you can see it here in what we call the epiphysis. That's the ends of the bone. So every long bone has a diaphysis, a shaft, and has two epiphyses at the ends. And those are the sites of articulation, where the bone makes contact with another bone for movement. You can see that these are filled with spongy bone. Again, big idea, weight reduction. Right? We don't want this to be solid bone, which is way too much. Plus, spongy bone allows for some compactness or shock absorption, if you will. And again, a site for blood cell formation. Right? Because in your life, right where you are currently, it is primarily in your hips that you are forming red blood cells in the iliac crest, which is spongy bone in there. You might have a little bit going on in your humerus or your femur. And when you get to be my age, it's just in the hips. Okay? Start to lose that ability. All right. Then, every epiphysis is going to be covered by articular cartilage. Every epiphysis will be covered by articular cartilage. So that's going to be part of the joint. It's where movement is going to occur. It's going to be smooth hyaline cartilage covering that bone, allowing it to move without being impeded. And it's rolling, it's moving, it's gliding smoothly because of that cartilage. Right? Unless you're starting to lose some. You might get to the knee. And then there's a nutrient foramen that brings in blood vessels. So unlike cartilage, which did not have a direct blood supply, bone has a direct blood supply. that there will be blood vessels into the bone directly supplying these cells of bone. So it's a very much living tissue. It is very much constantly changing its shape and structure, okay, because of the cells that are found there. And that's in large part because of a direct blood supply. Has anybody broken a bone? Has anybody had the bone break through the skin? When it does, you will see blood out of the bone breaking. Right? Where the bone is broken, there will be blood, not just breaking through the skin, but the bone itself will be bleeding. Now, the big idea of that is, hey, it heals in 6 to 8 weeks because of the blood supply. It's a great thing. It's a good thing. All right, and then epithelial tissues. Remember, every surface has an epithelial tissue. And there are two of them. Periosteum. Peri means around. So this is on the outside, around the tissue. And then the other is endosteum, and that's what lines the inside, not just in the medullary cavity, not just here in the diaphysis, but all the spongy bone. All of this space in here is covered by endosteum. So why am I mentioning this? What's, again, a huge idea. This is where the cells that repair the brinks are present. This is where they reside. You have a direct supply of cells to heal the bones if they break. And again, that's why they heal so much easier and faster than things like cartilage or tendons and ligaments. Because of the blood supply, because of the cells present right there in the tissue. Okay? All right. So, what about the cells that I've mentioned several times? There is a line of cells that are present in your bone. When I say a line, I'm meaning that there is a cell that is going to change, that is going to differentiate and mature. We're going to start with a cell called osteogenic. As always, when I see those words, a new word, what in the world does it mean? Osteo means bone. Genic means genesis, beginning. So this is the first bone. This is the beginning bone. This is the bone that is found in that tissue we just described, in the endosteum and the periosteum. This is the cell that's going to help repair your bone if it breaks. Why? Because it's mitotic. It is a stem cell. It's going to undergo mitosis and increase the number of bone cells present. So if you break your bone, if you fracture it, you're going to have dead cells there. You need to be replacing them. This is the cell that's going to start doing that. So osteogenic. Now the osteogenic cells become osteoblasts. We've described what blast means before. Blast means capable of forming. Okay, what's it going to form? It's going to form bone. In the name, it tells us what it's doing. This is the bone that is going to secrete the bone material. Okay, the actual bone matter or bone material. And it is the primary cell to form bone matrix. Now we've got the background material, the thing of a tissue that the cell resides in. This is the cell that's going to form that matrix. It is non-mitotic. It should not undergo cell division. If it does, then we have a cancer that is called a sarcoma. That's a tissue, a cancer of a hard tissue or a connective tissue. So this is a cell that should not divide. Kind of like the cells of your skin, ones that shouldn't divide. Then the osteoblasts become osteocytes. This is a picture of an osteocyte. It is trapped in the bone matrix. By trapped, I just mean that it's surrounded completely by the bone material. And it lives or resides in something called a lacuna, or singular, lacunae, or plural. The translation of that word just means cave. So that's kind of an idea of what it's doing. It's sitting there in its own little cave. And it's maintaining the bone material around it. It's not making it, but it's maintaining it. Okay, so there's going to be some things that it does for maintenance. And they interconnect. All of these osteocytes connect with each other through what are called canaliculi, which just means small canal. And when you look at this picture, you kind of have, or at least I think I can see an impression of what that means. Each one of these little spicules, these little appendages of the cell, are in the canaliculi, and they're interconnected. Okay, they're coming in contact with each other. I'll show more of that in a second. All right. Now, not a part of this. Okay, this last cell is not in this cell line. These are osteoclasts. Don't shoot the messenger for blast and clast. I'm sorry. They sound the same. You've got to keep them off. You've got to keep them differentiated. Blast forms. Clast dissolves. Blast makes new bone. Clast breaks down the bone. You're like, why do I want to break down my bone? That sounds dangerous. Well, no, because remember, you maintain calcium levels and phosphate levels in the blood. And where's the calcium and the phosphate? In the bone material. So you are depositing calcium and phosphate into your bones so that when you need it, you have a repository, a deposit. You can take it out of the bones. The trick then is that you are depositing as much as you are absorbing. Okay? You don't want it to be off balance. We'll talk more about that on Wednesday. So the osteoclasts dissolve. And, as we've talked about in lab, all those bone markings, the tubercles, the tuberosities, the trochanters, how did those form? Because your bones are moving. You're pulling on them with muscle tension. So as you pull, you reshape the bone. And the osteoclasts are helping in that remodel activity. Okay? So they do have a good role. All right. So what is the matrix? The matrix is hydroxyapatite. Hydroxyapatite. And it is a combination of calcium phosphate, what we've been talking about, with some calcium carbonate. All right, just a different ion attached to the calcium. So this is a chemical diagram of this material. So these are all calcium ions, and that's the phosphates. And what these do is form a crystal, a little crystal. And the crystals are attached to collagen fibers, the protein, collagen. So you literally would be like taking, a string and dipping it into salt water, and when you let the water dry out, you get the string coated in salt crystals. That's what we're doing here. So it is both a protein, which is an organic molecule, with hydroxyapatite, which is inorganic. And that's what gives us the strength of bone. It's the fact that we have coated collagen with these crystals. It also, because it is collagen, gives us the understanding that bone flexes. It's not so rigid that it can't flex a little bit. Okay, not a lot, just a little. Okay, if you see a slow motion bat hitting a ball, it flexes a little bit. Same idea with bone. You can't see it, but it actually does flex a little bit. All right, so there's our pathway again. Genic, blast, site. Genic, blast, site. Okay? This is the cell that is going to form the new bone. This is the mature cell. You better have some of those if your bones break, so that they can replace the bone that's been damaged. And then this is an osteoclast. Completely different cell lines. Okay? These are macrophages, the cell that engulfs bacteria that you might get from an infection. Now, instead of becoming macrophages, they fuse together to form this cell. This cell sits, this is one cell, sits on the edge of the bone and is going to resorb, that is, to dissolve the bone as you need calcium and collagen. All right. So those are our four cells: genic, blast, site. And then off to the side, class. Okay, now you already, I hope you're thinking, blast forms and the class dissolves. It does the opposite. They are opposite cells. They're doing opposite actions. Now, compact bone. The compact bone is in a very specific arrangement. We call these osteons. Osteo, again, means bone. So this is a unit of a bone, okay, a bone material. And each one of these is an osteon. These little circular cylinders, literally they're cylinders, if you will. And it is composed of lamellae, that's the circle, around what we call the central canal or a virgin canal. That is the dude name. Central canal is a much better way to describe it. Where is it? In the center. Well, it's the central canal. And notice what's in the central canal. An artery, vein, and a nerve. Everybody who broke their nerve is going to tell me that it hurt. You know, it hurt. Because there's a nerve in there. And it hurt. Okay? You can tear cartilage and it doesn't hurt. It's kind of a bad idea, but it doesn't hurt. But there's no nerves to it. Okay? So, each one of these osteons, each one of these little units around the central canal are lamellae, layers around it. Now, in between the osteons, there are perforating canals. And that's how the blood vessels are getting into the central canal region. Okay? And then the lacunae, each one of these little dark dots is the lacunae. That's where the osteocytes are found. And then, of course, everything on the inside is covered by endosteum, and on the outside is the periosteum, right? The tissue around the outside of the bone. Now, spongy bone that is found deep to the compact bone has these little networks of bone material. We call that a trabeculae. Trabeculae just means network or mesh. So it's all these little interconnecting pieces of bone. It's not solid and has open spaces where the bone marrow will be found. So, the bone marrow is going to be one of two types. It is red marrow if it is forming blood cells. So it will have the appearance of blood when you see it. Okay, now if you're into chicken and you break the bones of the chicken, you see the red stuff. And if you break other bones, you'll see the yellow stuff. And that's fact. Okay? So the bones that you had as a child, as a smaller, younger individual that was producing red blood cells for you, most of those have been replaced by adipose tissue. Okay? You don't need as much growth of red blood cells as you used to. You're in a maintenance format now. Okay? So this is what we call myeloid tissue when it is red marrow, which means that it just translated as marrow. Okay? It's what's forming blood cells. And then, of course, the yellow marrow is fat or adipose. So this is the adipose. And if you've ever read Thoreau and he talks about sucking the marrow out of one, right, that's what gives the chicken stock great flavor. It's called yellow marrow. It's the good soups. Boil your bones, get that marrow out, good stuff. Get into that, restocks, everything. So now I got a whole slew of pictures for you. So hang on, right? So there's the epiphysis. What's on the edge of the epiphysis? What covers the epiphysis?
Compact bone.
Well, yes, compact bone on the outside, or the edge of it, but what covers that? Yeah, I heard it, I think. The cartilage, the articular cartilage. There's a picture of the red bone marrow. There's the trabeculae in there, the little bone spicule. Okay. We can see the osteon, this cylinder of bone material. And we'll get there is the central canal with the lacuna around it. Now, I think it's a really cool thing that these cylinders, remember, and talked about this a little in lab, two main structures that are, or two shapes rather, that are very, very strong. Triangles and circles. Look at what this is. Circle after circle after circle. A cylinder. But notice what the collagen fibers do. This cylinder goes that way. That cylinder goes that way. That one goes opposite. They run in opposite directions. Why is that a big idea? It means the bone can twist a little bit, but because the fibers are in opposite direction, it's not as likely to break. So that's a lot of the structural force. And if you've heard that bone is stronger than concrete, yes, it is. It really is. It can take compression forces that break concrete, and it won't break. That's pretty cool. People have pushed down on the floorboards of their cars in accidents and dented the floorboards, but not broken their bones. That's pretty amazing. Tell you how strong you are, really, in that kind of force. Okay? All right, so there's our osteocytes and their little lacunae. You can see the canaliculi, the little connectors. So what's going on is the blood comes in, and then by diffusion goes out to each of the cells, and then disperse nutrients to all their neighboring cells. They're all interconnected. So they're all receiving nutrients and oxygen, getting rid of their waste products the same way. All right, see, I told you. Let's picture. All right, so the last topic today, bone development. How did you go from this embryo to where you are today? How did we develop bone? Okay, I've already mentioned there are two methods. We're going to look at intramembranous today, and on Wednesday we'll talk about endochondral. So intramembranous, when I see that term, again I always look at the word and I say intra. Intra means within. Within what? Within a membrane. Well, what's going on in the membrane? Ossification, bone formation. So we're going to start with a membrane that is then going to be replaced by bone. That's the way to kind of think about what's happening. And it's going to happen in the flat bones of the skull, clavicle, you could add the sternum, you could add parts of the pelvis. Okay, it's just any of those generalized flat bones. Now, the membrane is going to be embryonic mesenchyme. Remember, mesenchyme came from mesoderm. That was that middle layer of the embryo. Ectoderm, mesoderm, endoderm. It's the middle layer. So mesenchyme is a little differentiated tissue. A little bit more mature than just straight up mesoderm. So it's a flat sheet of mesenchyme. The mesenchyme will have within it osteogenic cells. And those osteogenic cells, as we've already mentioned, become osteoclasts. And they start to secrete the bone tissue. They produce the collagen fibers. They're making the crystals. And they're making the material of the bone. Then they mature to osteocytes, present within what used to be mesenchyme. Okay. Oh, okay. So, this is the flat bone that we're trying to form. We have the compact bone again, we have the spongy bone in between. So this used to be a membrane, a sheet of this mesenchyme material. And so what it does is starts to ossify. It becomes this bone material because of the osteoblasts. And it would be as if you were drawing a little circle in the middle of your paper. And you just kept drawing bigger and bigger circles around that one little circle as the spread of bone material moved outward. Or drop a pebble, and little ripples go farther and farther out. As bone material begins to be formed, it spreads out and replaces what was present. The mesenchyme that was present. Now, after a certain amount of time, as this bone begins to form, osteoclasts are going to remodel the bone. They're going to remold it. Because, as you've already seen, if you've taken a look at your skulls upstairs in the lab, there's a whole lot of stuff going on inside. It's not just a nice, smooth little bowl. There's ridges and folds and all sorts of things. So as the brain begins to develop within the skull, the osteoclasts are helping to reshape the bone around the developing brain. In other words, the brain is driving the shape of the skull. So you have to reshape the bone because of the brain material. And then finally you end up with this sandwich, these two layers of compact bone.
So there's our little island of osteoclast, formed bone material.
It continues to grow and spread out farther and farther and farther until we form the entire sheet. Just a different way of showing it. Okay, starting with mesenchymes, little islands that begin to spread out until eventually we get all of the blood vessels and the material begins to really form to the bone. This is occurring in your skull, clavicle, sternum, pelvic bones, etc. Now, in the skull development, remember there are sutures, places where the bones come in contact with each other. And when we look at our normal skull shape, we see that there is the coronal suture, the sagittal suture, and the lambdoid suture. There is also one that was between the halves of the frontal bone. By the time you're born, that is pretty much fused. It's not really a thing. We have the anterior and the posterior fontanelles, the soft spots. Those over time are going to be replaced by bone. So they're very much like the mesenchyme that was present when you were an embryo and then into the fetal period. But sometimes, as you can see in the diagrams here, there's a misformation where some of the sutures close prematurely. The reason that you want these sutures to have just a little bit of opening, and you certainly want the fontanelles, is because your head is big and mom's vaginal canal not as big. So the bones have to shift when you were born. Okay? You have to get squeezed through, as it were. So they need to move a little bit. I'm telling you, every kid comes out looking like a cone head. It's just not that cute. There's a lot of pressure getting pressed on that head. All right? But as I mentioned, sometimes they fuse prematurely. Okay? They'll fuse prematurely. Well, my oldest son, David, was born with what's called sagittal craniosynostosis. It meant that his sagittal suture had fused prematurely. He had practically no anterior or posterior fontanelle. So off to go to Riley because that's where you go. I'm a Riley guy. Not a St. Vincent. I'm a Riley. You go down there and the neurosurgeon takes out the bones. Right here. You strip out of his sagittal suture. Just remove it. Took out a section of his posterior around his occipital and lambdoid suture. Then made cuts here across the temporal bone and parietal bone region. Because if they had not done that, his head would have ended up looking like that. Where it would have bossed to the anterior and bossed to the posterior, meaning that it got larger. Okay? So they went in and they did all of that, and the surgeon said, oh, there'll be a little swelling. There'll be a little blood loss. It took a unit and a half. Oh, and there'll be some sutures. He has over 100 sutures, and they had about 40 staples. So that was at 2 months of age. And then that's when he was about a year. And then when he was starting to walk, that was him. So you can see the posterior of his head's just fine. That's Ross the cat. Ross went on to give me evidence. And then that's the picture. And then this is David now. Okay. So you can see no long-term effect. Absolutely not. Now, if you know David, and some of you do know who he is, from Pendleton, he has little scars behind his ears where they made the incisions. Okay? So if he shaves his head, which he's done a few times, well, not shaved, buzzed it, you can see the scar all the way across his skull. He would always threaten to do that instead of get a tattoo. Now he's gotten tattoos, so I don't know whether he's going to keep the scar or keep the scar thing or not. So, intramembranous ossification. All right? And most of the time, obviously, it goes just according to plan, and occasionally it doesn't. The reason that we assume this happened is because his head got stayed in his mom's uterus down towards the left, or to the right pelvic region. And he didn't move. I mean, his legs would move, but he didn't flip and flop and stuff. So we think pressure caused the bone to fuse prematurely. There are syndromes, genetic syndromes, which cause the same situation to happen. But those children usually have issues with their appendages or cleft lips and different things like that. It's genetic. There you go. We'll talk endochondral ossification on wet nursery.